Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast with me, James Dixon. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. Never more apt than when I'm speaking to a guest who's joining us from across the pond. I'm always grateful when we get guests over in North America who have taken the time out of their day, usually at the start of the day, given the time difference. It's late afternoon here on the 7th of October for me in the UK, but pretty much straight off the bat on a Monday morning, my guest joins us. Usually, I believe that they be based up in the sort of the Pacific Northwest, up in the state of Washington, up in Seattle. But joining us from Chicago today, I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to the Event Industry News Podcast, the CEO and co-founder of MJ Unpacked. I'm not going to tell you what that show is yet. That's very much for our guest to tell you, because it is intriguing, fascinating, all those sort of superlatives when I was reading into it before we did today's recording. So please welcome to the podcast, Mr. George Jage. George, a very warm welcome to the event.
Hey, James. Thank you so much for letting me be here today. Really appreciate it. And always happy to get up as early as I need to for an opportunity like this.
Fabulous. And if I may ask, first of all, before we dive into MJ Unpacked to find out about that, you hopefully I was right in saying you're based in Seattle usually, which is the Pacific Northwest, but you're in Chicago today. What takes you there?
Actually, I came in a little early to visit with some of my extended family, maybe a last-ditch effort to try to convince them to not believe the brainwashing that they've gotten from the algorithm of social media for the upcoming presidential election. I don't think I was successful. There is actually a cannabis conference that's going on. It's an investor conference here in Chicago starting tomorrow. So I'm just here for tomorrow for the day for that. And we've got our next event coming up really quick in November.
And you've kind of snuck in a little bit there about what the event is. You are the CEO and co-founder of MJ Unpacked. You mentioned there's a cannabis conference taking place. Tell us what MJ Unpacked is.
So I've been in the event space for quite some time. Back in about 2014, friend of a friend in the events industry calls me up, and he knew I had just sold World Team Media to F&W Media. And said, I heard you're available. Do you want to start a pot show? And I kind of scratched my head and I'm like, well, like, is this really going to get legalized? And they were moving
flower pots, or
they were still actually marijuana, ganja, weed, cannabis, however you want to color it. Actually, whole plant medicine that's been around and been used by society for 5,000 years. Our actual bodies are like have an endocannabinoid system that actually perfectly mirrors a phytocannabinoid system. So there's really nature's medicine. But besides that, so he calls me up and he's like, let's start a pot show. I heard you're available and we'll be 50-50 partners and you can run it. And I said, oh, okay. So you're going to put up the money? He goes, I don't have any. So that conversation didn't really go very far at the time. So, and then the group that had actually started a small cannabis publication reached out to me. It was actually the first time I really actually went and worked for somebody else. And I built a company, an event called MJ BizCon, that really was and has been the dominant event in the cannabis industry for a lot of years, especially the early days, because everybody was trying to figure out what does this industry look like, what does it need. So it was a supply side show where, to give a little bit of a tip of the hat to across the pond comedy, it's like people needed the machine in the corner that goes bing. So it was equipment, it was cultivation, supplies, lighting, air conditioning, treatment systems, fertilizers, soils, manufacturing equipment, packaging. I ended up leaving that company. We were actually recognized as the fastest growing show in the entire United States for 2 years in a row. Scaled the company up from one employee in about 200,000 US dollars to about 13 million with a $7 million EBITDA in 3 years. The owners and I had some irreconcilable differences regarding some promises of equity that were made that weren't resolved. So I left that company and we settled our differences outside of court with way too many lawyers and expenses. But fast forward, I always knew, and this is what getting to MJ Unpacked, cannabis is a consumer packaged goods industry. It is about the brands, it's about the product, it's about the packaging. America is the largest consumer of branded goods in the entire world because of our hyper consumeristic, natured economy. Sure. We're also the leading exporter of brands globally. And so, I just, the theory and the thesis that we built this on is that, cannabis, at the end game for cannabis, the biggest trade show in the space is going to be more of a CPG style show where brands are the key exhibitors, retailers are the ones coming, distributors kind of sit on both sides of the attendee exhibitor equation, depending on the nature of their distribution business. Yep. And this is where new products get introduced to the market. It's where the birthing of giants is going to happen, where the future Anheuser-Busch, Seagrams, or Marlboros of cannabis are going to emerge, and where new companies that are highly innovative, that large companies can't innovate, can come to market, catch some, magic pixie dust, and somebody's going to buy them for a really high valuation, and then leverage them against their distribution platform in the future to create that brand into the market. So, it's really fascinating, James, is that, we're starting a national cannabis CPG show before there's a national cannabis CPG market in the United States. If you're
But I suppose that the bigger point for us listening over in the UK and in Europe and in other parts of the world is that this is all borne out the fact that, okay, it might not be completely national yet in the USA, but in certain states, it's legal. Cannabis is legalized for social use. I think I was reading through the legislative timeline in Missouri where this year's show takes place, and it's sort of been a progressive move over the last decade or so to where it's been effectively fully legalized, and you can carry 3 ounces, I think, as a guy on the street. So
I'll keep you busy for at least a week if you got 3 ounces on you. But it's
but I mean, for people in the UK, this is, there is no such thing as a cannabis trade show because it's not a legalized business over here yet. But to me, when I read about it, it's blatantly obvious that where there's an industry and where there's a legalized industry, there is business. There has to be a trade show serving it.
Of course. And I'm a firm believer in face-to-face marketing and trade shows. I've been in the space for, like I said, for 30 years. And what I love about trade shows is just the exponential impact you can have on communities and commercial, sectors to really help them be more successful in the space, get product into more places and hire more employees, pay benefits and improve the lives of their employees. And I love that aspect of it. We could spend hours, James, talking about cannabis. It's really very, the regulatory structure, it's very convoluted. The basis for this is, and having lived in Colorado for a period of time, that the state constitution in Colorado requires that if the voters of the state pass a legislative measure, that the executive and legislative branches of the state have no choice but to adopt it. And this is where cannabis was able to be put on the ballot by some advocates in the industry to legalize adult use. And it was the first state to do so, followed by Washington, Oregon, California. And there's been this kind of thing, but every single state sets up its own regulatory structures, and some good, some bad. When you're talking about setting up a brand new market, and what's, get into the fact that, the federal government still recognizing this as illegal subjects all of the companies that are touching cannabis to a tax code called 280E. Short version is that most cannabis companies are paying an 80% marginal tax rate. Yes. And so that there's initiatives right now, and there's some movement by the federal government, the Biden administration, to move cannabis from a Schedule 1 narcotic to a Schedule 3 narcotic per the Controlled Substances Act. Now, again, we could go into all sorts of history of this. I mean, it was basically Richard Nixon and his administration have come clean on this. It was never about marijuana, but they wanted to be able to vilify the hippies and the black communities on the nightly news so that Nixon could get reelected and retain power, sadly. And so they, made cannabis a Schedule 1 narcotic and made it federally illegal, saying that it has no medical benefit and a high risk for abuse. Now, Israel's been on the forefront of cannabis research, and there's a gentleman, Raphael Mechoulam, who's considered the godfather of cannabis research, is the one who actually identified both the THC molecule gets us high and how it does that in our bodies, but also that the human body naturally has an endocannabinoid system. And to kind of break that down into a very simple form, it basically is kind of the homeostatic regulatory body that controls our kind of mental health, our physical wellness, and our spiritual wellness, right? So it's mental health, it's physical health, and everything else. And it's a really powerful, plant medicine. It's not to be taken lightly because it is psychotropic, and there's always risk for abuse. I mean, you can get addicted to cake. But it's the reality is that this is really some really powerful medicine from nature that has been with us since we were crawled out of our caves.
Absolutely. And on a personal level, I've had family members many years ago, who had a condition called multiple sclerosis, and it's a proven benefit for people with multiple sclerosis medically. That for a long time, the charities that represent and look to fundraise for that particular condition have long advocated for its legalization in the UK from a medical point of view, and we've slowly moved into things like the oils and the extracts and stuff that you can get legally in the UK now. And I guess that forms part of your show as well, or the sort of the oils and the sort of not the byproducts, but the alternative ways of I guess ingesting it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different form factors, and I think the biggest thing is that because of this kind of artificial fallacy of that cannabis is bad for you, there's been very, very little research done in the United States that would qualify to, acceptable to the FDA to say that this is generally recognized as safe. But we really are only scratching the surface of the medical benefits. And I've met a lot of people along my journey, children that have a form of epilepsy where they have like 5 to 10 seizures a day. Like they take this medicine and they have one a month. It's life-changing for these people. And prior to this, people that wanted to give their child medicine that was life-changing or life-saving, they would sometimes get their doors kicked down by the DEA and have their child taken away and put into Child Protective Services for giving them plant medicine that's healing their child. And that's just really sad and unfortunate, byproducts of bad governance. And I've met people that, I just had a friend pass away, Marshall Ogan, and he only discovered about a year and a half ago that he had 3 glioblastomas in his brain. They gave him weeks, maybe a month to live, and he was able to get some proton radiation therapy and the traditional Western medicine and things, but he was also taking what's known as Rick Simpson oil. And there's been people who have actually abated, and become cancer-free by taking this. And it's a super high potent concentrated form of cannabis. Like if you take this, you're going to be, sleeping in bed for a couple of days. It's not, to be taken lightly, but there's medicine out there, and we're just scratching the surface, James, on how really powerful this can be for the human physiological wellness.
And in terms of scratching the surface, this event that you launched, that you run, that you organize, MJ Unpacked, is, I'm guessing, from what I read, is the only show of its kind in the USA at the moment, and so you must be at the forefront of that particular movement in terms of bringing people together to discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, when cannabis got legalized and when I took over at MJ Biz, I mean, there was like 20 or 30 shows. You could go to a show every week in the cannabis space. Some were not very well organized or executed, and everything else, but there's some smaller state shows that are focused on brands and retailers in California. They're starting to see some emerge in New York, and all of these kind of markets live on a state level, but also brands that are really looking at not just that are looking beyond the horizon and saying, where does this get to? Our event facilitates a lot of opportunities for brands to meet with partners in other states. It's very expensive for them to get a license, set up operations, everything in a new state. So a lot of brands are kind of going what is called an asset light model, where they're, basically having somebody else manufacture their product under their state cannabis license, and they'll control usually the last mile of distribution, meaning the sales channel of going out and getting this into the stores. And they have somebody else that's kind of managing the manufacturing and logistics side of it. And it's a good play because, at some point when we break down these artificial state barriers where you cannot ship cannabis product across state lines, we're going to see obviously centralized or regionalized distribution centers and manufacturing, and create some, economies of scale.
And in terms of the actual event itself and how that's going to manifest itself, I hope I said this right. It is St. Louis, not St. Louis.
It is St. Louis, which could get confused with Louisville, in Kentucky. But so we've moved our show around, to try to kind of go to the areas of growth and really, where our event really kind of hits its sweet spot is when you see a market that's already been open, established. You've got operators selling product into the market.
Yeah.
But there's a diverse sense of license ownership. Like the state of Illinois, I'm in Chicago today. A majority, like 80% of the market's controlled by 4 large, multi-state operators, MSOs as we call them. They're typically listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange with a OTCCB listing in the U.S. That really limits the quality, and I think also the price. And so you got other states that have just issued way too many licenses, and then people get in the game and they immediately race to the bottom on price. That hurts everybody. It hurts the retailer, it hurts the other manufacturers, the other brands in the market. And so I think Missouri, honestly, like the more I study each one of these state markets, might be one of the best run state markets in the entire United States. They've become the 5th largest state as far as total retail sales of cannabis recently. They have the lowest excise tax. It's only 6%. I live in Washington, where our tax on cannabis is 37%, I believe, probably the highest. But they also kind of started the industry where, it was a lot of, kind of people that came from, big CPG that understood and compassionately understood the medical benefit of cannabis that really started the medical industry in Missouri. And every market starts out with medical, and they, treat it for certain cases like MS, glaucoma, end-of-life treatment, end-of-life care. And then as soon as they add pain to the symptoms, everybody's like, "Ooh, my elbow hurts. Let me get a script so I can get some weed." And so that's usually when the medical market usually expands significantly. And then they move into adult use, which is also known as recreational, or you use the word social use. And when that happens, a lot of times the medical operators are the ones that kind of feed and control the supply chain early on as new licenses come on board and everything else. So in states that have a very limited number of companies that are controlling that medical market, that gives them unprecedented ability to pop bully, like in New Jersey. I have a friend that's trying to buy some flour. He has to buy it from a big MSO, and they'll reject his order and say, "You can't buy our flour unless you buy our vape cartridges and our edibles." And he doesn't want to buy either of those because they're terrible. They don't sell well. He's going to end up having a discount and probably sell them as a loss, and he's losing the opportunity cost to sell better products that are available in the marketplace.
So there's, I guess, by the sounds of things, there's a spectrum within the industry at the moment between, even when in states where it's legalized, that there's, and again, this is something that certainly in the UK we sometimes struggle to get our heads around a little bit, is the difference between federal, state law, and there's, and even, local city bylaws and county bylaws in some parts of the US, is that you can have these differences in legislation and law, which from a going back to what we're talking about, which is the show and MJ Unpacked, must again offer difficulties but also opportunities, because I think earlier on this year you had another show in Atlantic City in New Jersey. So I guess it affords you the opportunity of taking your brand and taking your event and your show to these different parts of the United States, where each one may be slightly different, and that's opening business opportunities for you.
Absolutely. So I think fundamentally the thing that differentiates our event from every other one in the industry is we limit our addressable market specifically by limiting attendance to licensed operators who have a title of manager or higher, and or decision makers on an investment or a research standpoint. And the reason we do that is twofold. One is it doesn't waste anybody's time. There's a lot of people that are kind of curious, that want to come walk around trade shows, grab a bunch of free materials or whatever, and take up a lot of people's time. So we have everybody in the room is going to be a decision maker and somebody that's going to probably create a conversation that you're going to learn something from, have an opportunity to do business with. But it also, if I've got a packaging company that's exhibiting with us, his competitor can't go buy an attendee ticket and walk the aisles and sell from the aisles for, a fraction of the cost that he's investing into the event. So we're protecting our exhibitors, our suppliers that are exhibiting with us, but we're also creating a higher value proposition for our attendees. Now, when we move from market to market, there's nuances. And I think, any trade show is always going to have a kind of higher regional draw, certainly local draw. And then there's the national draw, right? So when we're in Missouri, we're seeing a lot of attendance coming in from Illinois and Michigan, Missouri. It's on the ballot in Nebraska. Arkansas is moving towards adult use. Oklahoma's like this really unique kind of state regulatory system where it's if you have $100 and a set of teeth, you could get a cannabis license. And it's created kind of a true kind of open market economy where, people are going to have to compete on quality and price to be able to, be a winner in that market. And eventually it's going to, filter out some of the lesser successful operators. But yeah, it's we're still seeing people coming in from California, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, or Massachusetts, Florida. And this is really, there's a lot of options out there for events. And,
Sure.
we made the decision from the onset, like, one, we're not in the trade show industry. We're in the cannabis industry. We're embedded with our market and listen to them very closely and understand their businesses.
Great.
Second is that, we need to meet the markets, meet the needs of the market at the moment. So, over time, we continue to evolve this. Like, we attract a lot of investors to our event because everybody needs capital. That's not the fundamental goal of the show, but it's an important component of it today. The same way that we're introducing a lot of research and science into our event, because if the research and commercial market don't connect, so that the commercial people can basically apply that that research into a commercial application, then fund back the research, we're never going to get to being able to get the research done we need to on cannabis.
How difficult is it for you to maintain that finger on the pulse of the industry that you're serving with these shows and the operational aspects of the trade show itself? Because operationally, regardless of the market you're serving, trade shows that they need to, you've got the same headaches as any other trade show operator. You're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with floor plans, you're dealing with exhibitors, budgets, etc. So how do you balance keeping up with the industry and operating the actual show itself?
I don't sleep. No, it's exhausting, but I think where I have, kind of self-analyzed my strengths in the event space, I think I operate, early market events. We did this for the tea industry. My father and I created the Off-Price Show. Kim, my wife and current co-founder and mother of my children and breaker of chains, she's, we've had this experience kind of building these events up in early stage markets. And there's a certain element of chaos that I think trade events actually provide that point of clarity. They provide an opportunity to really make sure that there's kind of a unified, effort to kind of move the legalization in our case forward, but it's also, dispel disinformation. There's certainly plenty of that these days in all forms of media. And really just, help unite the industry and in and around a common cause. That's important component of the event. Sadly, I for some reason, I've figured out that I operate in chaos really well, maybe because I create chaos, but it's part of the fun, right? Like, this is so complicated and there's need for people to provide answers to complex situations, taxation, manufacturing, pesticides, testing.
It's all applicable, and I think a little chaos is not bad. I think if you ask most people who work in the events industry, so that they'll say that a fairly big percentage of their life is spent flying, fighting fires, flying by the seat of their pants, and living in complete chaos.
That is the event space.
They spend 80% of the time planning, and 20% of the time dealing with the inevitable, which is that something's going to go wrong, something's going to need a last minute decision. The plan is going to go out the window at some point, and you just got to go with it. And what you just said there rings it's controlled chaos in any. I don't think I've ever worked on an event, be it a conference, a trade show, a live music event, where there isn't an element of controlled chaos and stepping into the unknown as soon as those doors open.
One of the things I always look for when we're bringing new people onto our team is if they have any type of hospitality experience working in a restaurant. Because in a restaurant, you go in at 2:00, you prep the food, dice up the tomatoes, whatever you're doing. And as soon as the restaurant opens, you go into this like kind of state of mind where it's like things are just moving and you just have to react. If you've thought it through, you want to make sure all of the craziness stays in the kitchen and the front of house. It's, beautiful piano music and everybody having a nice time. And it does, it's like, we do that with trade shows, but what we do is we stretch that from one day to 6 months or a year of plan. And then a much more intensive period of controlled chaos as you get through the service. And then you get done and you're like, not sure what happened. And you go, man, that was fun. Let's do it again.
And in terms of having fun, I had a look at where the next event is taking place in St. Louis. It's at the Union Station Hotel, and I just had a sort of, let's have a quick Google, and I wasn't expecting what I saw from a venue. This is a stunning venue.
It is, and part of our event vibe is really I like doing events in hotels where there's, restaurants, there's bars where people can go to, they're staying in the hotel and they're walking down to the event floor. It just creates that energy that goes from, well beyond the event floor and everything else versus more of a traditional kind of cement box building. And everybody's got to take a shuttle bus or an Uber back to the hotel and not know where they're going that night.
Yeah.
I don't want to see Michelangelo. I don't want to see Michelangelo, but I know how he felt when he walked into the Sistine Chapel, because that's my jam. I love designing really amazing events. And like when I got there and realized that they have an aquarium on property that backs up to the exhibit hall that used to be where the trains came in, where the West was settled, and you can actually open up this air wall. And I'm like, I could do a Shark Tank in front of a real Shark Tank. It's just a beautiful facility, and everybody at the property has been just absolutely a pleasure to deal with and super professional, and no in-house exclusives that I have to deal with, which I hate, but we don't have to go there today.
Well, that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing that I've got used to, because I'm part of a show called Event Tech Live that's been in the UK now for over a decade, and that was launched out in the US last year. So I've had the good fortune of working on an event now for 2 years over in the USA, in Las Vegas, and exclusives, union labor, all of these things that are alien to us when we go over there. It's a steep, sharp, sometimes brutal learning curve.
And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that a lot of the venues and facilities you have in the UK, they're not kind of the Messe model that's predominant in Germany and other parts of Europe.
We've got some big exhibition centers. The Messe models, the German ones are just gigantic, and there's some in the Netherlands as well. But we've got good spaces. We've got XL London, NEC. There's a good one in Harrogate, Telford. But in terms of the big centers, the Messe model is not as prevalent here in the UK as it is in continental Europe.
I think it's fairly safe to say that, London and the UK are really the epicenter for the global trade show industry. When you look at some of the large companies that are based there, we sold the off-price show to Tarsus. Tarsus is now part of Informa. Reed UK is obviously their kind of headquarter flagship, and Clarion and all those other companies that are based in the UK. Maybe trade shows are the new form of British imperialism.
Well, that's a whole other topic as well, for a whole other podcast. But looking at the venue, getting that right has got to play a massive part as well in then the uptake, both from exhibitors and delegates. Because if they do what I did today and they go on and they go, holy crap, look at that venue. We've got to go there. This is because you want them to come and do business, but if they're enticed by a good-looking venue and somewhere that they think they could go and also have some fun there for a few days and enjoy themselves, then why not? You've got to offer that carrot.
Yeah, and the Hard Rock in Atlantic City was also just phenomenal to work with. We're super excited to be going back there again next April. And we've done a handful of our events at casino properties. And again, going back to cannabis is federally legal, and those gaming licenses are federally governed. So we've had to be very careful to make sure that, we have very clear posted rules of no possession, distribution, sale of cannabis on the property. I did an event at a property in Las Vegas. Their sales team approved us to have a shuttle bus to a local dispensary. Apparently they didn't tell their security team, and their security team was basically shaking down everybody getting off our shuttle bus. They're like, you can't come in here with that bag. Crisis management, right?
Controlled chaos, George.
This too shall pass.
Absolutely. And in terms of uptake, before we wrap up today, give us an idea of how the St. Louis show is shaping up at the moment.
Fantastic. Like I said, there was a lot of I think earlier in the industry that the West Coast, the Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and California, we're going to lead the charge and kind of expand nationally and kind of own the cannabis industry. California certainly has, legacy position in the market as one of the, in the Northern Triangle being one of the best appellations for some of the best grown cannabis in the country, if not the world. Then the East Coast kind of came online, and you got a lot more money and very smart, business people coming in that, they're going to kind of sweep in and eat everybody's lunch and kind of take over the West Coast, because the West Coast never really actualized. I'm telling you, it's the Midwest companies. These companies are very, very well run. I went to a store in Missouri, Proper Cannabis, and it was stunning. I mean, it would feel like you were walking into a Tiffany's, to be honest with you. I mean, the visual merchandising, the presentation, the level of service by the staff, the available information, sitting down at a table for a consult with a leather-bound menu of product that's available, that's fresh that day, was exquisite. And, it's, so I think we continue to see, the market evolve in a really, powerful, meaningful way. I love what a lot of these companies in Missouri are doing, both from a medical and a recreational standpoint. They're disciplined, and there's this kind of Midwest values in the U.S. We're a quirky nation, to say the least. I probably have to thank you for that, because we kind of, you're the father of our country at one point.
Well, let's not go down that route.
Yeah, it's I think there's just a kind of a down home kind of community value set that if somebody's house is on fire, you show up with a bucket of water, and if they're over there kicking their dog, you go and have a talk with them and tell them it's not okay. And so there's an accountability and a level of support in that market that is really, I think, unique and exceptional in the United States right now.
And it's been fascinating to find a little bit about that, because we've really just scratched the surface today, and I would urge anybody who's listening today to go and explore the event, explore the company that George operates. I think Jage Media is the company, and it just the little bit of research and the little bit of looking around that I did before today's recording and the chat that we've had as kind of it's something that I'd never come across before. So I thank our guest today, Mr. George Jage, the co-founder and CEO of MJ Unpacked, for joining us today. George, anything to add before we wrap up today? Where can people find you?
Well, before I get to that, I just want to say, if you want to come to our event with press credentials, I know you don't really have access to cannabis in the UK like we do here in the US. Please be our guest, and I'll make sure you get one of our VIP gift boxes that's loaded with product.
This is a dangerous territory.
Don't fly back across on the plane.
We're still recording. We're still recording.
Anyways,
very
James,
generous of you.
Yeah, James. Seriously, I really appreciate the opportunity. If any of the listeners want to learn more about our event, it's I almost did it again. www, which makes me sound like a boomer. It's mjunpacked.com. We're pretty prevalent on LinkedIn. You can find us at MJ Unpacked, MJ space Unpacked on LinkedIn. We have all sorts of other social media, MJ Unpacked, MJ Unpacked, MJ Unpacked. And we're excited because I think that we are at the precipice of the dawn of the brands, which we've always known has been coming in the cannabis industry. Mm-hmm. And, where I see a lot of the supply side shows in our industry really seeing massive declines in participation because the market has moved to the next level of growth, which we've been playing to be in the pole position for. I think that we're going to see a lot of growth for our event. We're super excited about the future.
And dare I say, if I add just a footnote to that on a personal level, my opinion is that this is only going to grow as a market, not just in the USA, but inevitably we're going to reach a stage over in Europe and in other parts of the world where shows like this are going to become just part of the fabric of the trade show industry, because it will be another industry that needs to be served by
just like events. The beer and wine and spirits industry. And yes, it's growing like a weed. And I just felt that we didn't actually hit any puns during the entire interview. So I thought I love it. Keep that one in there.
I love it. We're British. We love a pun. We love that. We love that sense of humor. Thanks very much to my guest today, Mr. George Jage, the co-founder of MJ Unpacked. Their event takes place in St. Louis later on this year. I think it's November 4th to 5th.
It's actually the 5th, 6th, and 7th. Where actually it'll be
7th. Forgive me.
The opening day will be Election Day in the United States. It should be a really interesting show. But James, thank you so much. Cheers, and really enjoyed the opportunity today.
Fabulous. And before we wrap up and end today's episode, just a couple of little shout outs for some things going on the event industry news side of things. If you're a supplier working in the events industry, whether that be in the UK, Europe, or over in the United States and North America, please do check out the A to Z supplier directory. If you are looking for a service or a supplier to help run your event, the chances are you'll find it on eventindustrynews.com within the A to Z supplier section. Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live return for their UK editions in November, which is next month. Registrations for both of those events are now open at eventtechlive.com and eventsustainabilitylive.com. And some early information on the Las Vegas editions of both of those events will be available on the websites as well, which should be returning to Las Vegas next year. My thanks again to my guest, Mr. George Jage, and we will see everybody on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye.